What happened the last time you used a funny voice in your video?
Nobody watched my video and it didn't do very well.
Just remind us, what is your name again?
My name is your dad.
And what shouldn't you do in your video?
Making a funny voice in my videos.
I'm Batman. Uniformation has sent 2 machines to my studio in some sort of a sponsoring gesture, and because of this I am letting you know that they didn't just send them to me. I begged, pleaded and asked for them to send me an additional one after I received my first one. Why did I do this? Well, because as you can tell or may not be able to tell, I'm in the United Kingdom and it is friggin' cold right now, which is honestly so difficult to 3D print resin in the cold. So these machines have a friggin' heater in them. It's one of the best machines you can get currently on the market. I think it's the best machine anyway. I love this machine, and if you're interested in it, there will be a link for that in my description. And without any further ado, let's get on to preparation of the Batman. It'd be a little bit sneaky of me to say that the machine itself is the reason for such high quality prints, and in reality the machine has got something to do with it, but also that has a lot to do with the parts themselves. How were they sculpted in the first place? How were they keyed and cut to fit together? And very much more importantly, how did you support them in the slicer before you printed them? I obviously try to keep all my supports into hidden areas. As you could see, I keep them in places where you generally wouldn't see them, which means that my cleanup for model prep is a lot less than what most people's would be if they weren't thinking about this when setting up these supports. I'm not gonna lie, if you use pre-supported from most companies, a lot of these people don't necessarily paint them, so you might find that the supports may not be in the optimal place for you. As you can tell, I also put a load of drainage holes, but these drainage holes double up really well as holders, where I can just shove an old paintbrush in them and it holds the model parts for me to be able to prime them. I primed all the parts with Chaos Black, and this is from Citadel. I have noticed that people have been asking me about this primer in the comments, and to be honest, I've completely moved away from the Vallejo airbrush primer and I'm pretty much exclusively using this primer as of now. However, I wouldn't say this is necessarily the best bang for your buck, but it is a really good primer for me and I like it. So if you like what it looks like, then maybe you would like the primer. I'm not saying it's the best. Please don't tell me in the comments that anything else is better, because I don't really care. This is what I'm using, and to paint rocks I use a bunch of other colors. I like to splat these colors over the rocks so that I can then smush them amongst each other. The way that I approach this process is essentially I just slap a load of paint on. What I'm trying to do is build up a load of texture, but with the color of the rock that I'm going to want at the end of it, or at least close to it as I possibly can. And that color is going to be mostly brown anyway. It's rock, it's sand, it's dirt, I don't even know what it is, but it's the bottom of the statue, so it needs to look like ground, and for me, ground is brown. And so I decided to paint it brown. As you can see, there is a load of different colors kind of smushed all over the place, and this helps to make it look a bit more natural. I used a bit more of a yellowy brown to just dry brush, or maybe let's call it a wet dry brush, all over the edges, just to pick up some more of the edges and make the details stand out. I then used a bunch of washes on the base so that I could get a little bit more depth in some of the areas that I wanted. And then I came straight back to the building that's on the base, and I dry brushed that basically with a load of grey. It's a building, so it's got to be concrete kind of looking. I'm going to use mostly greys and whites to build up some detail and get some of those edges nice and shiny so that you can see the details that were sculpted in the building. I'm then going to come back into that piece with some washes, namely a green at first. This is to give it an oldish look, and then I'm going to use a blue as well, just so that it's not a boring grey building. I don't know why blue is the good color, but I chose blue and it works for me. Next, I'm going to add some definition to the metallic bits on the piece, and this is going to be done by using a gunmetal color from Army Painter, and I'm going to overbrush that over all the clock bits and this top little tower thing, majig, whatever it is. I'm also going to use a panel line wash, and I'm going to wash over all of those parts to give it a bit more aging and put a little bit more depth in it. This video was sponsored by Zez Studios. Zez Studios is a Patreon where you sign up and you get up to 3 detailed statues a month. Their focus is on the quality of the statue, and this really shows in every single one of their pieces. I will leave a link in my description for Zez Studios if you're interested in joining them and getting the bat for yourself. Also, I would like to say a super special thank you to Zez Studios for sponsoring the video and making it possible to make these videos. One of the things that I've noticed painting the last few Zez Studios models is that they like to leave a load of little Easter eggs peppered all around the model, and one of these Easter eggs, or at least a few of them, on the base there is a couple of these dynamite sticks with the little clocks on them. I'm scared to say what they are for fear of the video being demonetized. However, they're on there, as well as the mask of the Joker. Maybe it's not the Joker's mask, maybe it's someone else's, I don't know, but it has a friggin' batarang in the side of it. Also, Zez didn't sculpt any of the markings that are on this mask, so if you're going to paint the markings, you're going to need to do it freehand. It's not that difficult, and if you watch how I do it, basically just paint a moustache, try not to drop your model on the table, and once you've got your model under control, paint the moustache and then the goatee around the mouth. This will make him look super epically Joker-like. You also need to add some eyebrows to this little mask. And once you've added the eyebrows, it's as simple as adding a red nose and lovely shiny red cheeks and some eyeliner around the inside of the eye. Usually, I don't really do the gruesome type statues, but it seems that these seem to be falling on my lap a lot more lately, and this model called for a little bit more gore than usual. So I stuck to using the blood special effects from Citadel, which is basically blood for the blood god, and I pretty much just dipped my brush into it and threw air at it from my airbrush in order to make spattered effects all over the areas that I wanted there to be a spattered effect, essentially. Then it was time for me to start working on the bat himself, and for the bat he's holding this really cool rope with a grappling hook, which Zez very kindly cut the grappling hook so that it can move when you breathe on your model. Oh, and speaking of Easter eggs around the model, this is just another one of those happy little Easter eggs that Zez likes to do. In this case though, I like it, but my hand did not like having to paint every single one of these things 2 times over. In order to get them green, I needed to paint them with a white first. Once that had dried, I had to paint them with that fluorescent green in order to make it look like that. Getting back to the TNT, I used some black and went over all the details after I'd painted the red on them, and I did it this way so that I could get some depth out of the red that I airbrushed over the top of them. Going on to the model, I'm going to start out with a grey, and this is sort of a mid-tone grey, just to sort of generally set the tone of the model. I'm not going to cover every single last bit. I'm going to leave some black in the shadows, but I am going to cover a large majority of the model with this step. And while that dries, because believe me, I painted a lot of paint on there, it needed to dry, I went back to the base and stuck on a couple of the other little bits. I also used a very shiny gloss clear from Tamiya over the center of the clocks on the TNT. Now for the black parts of this model. Usually I would attack this in such a way that I would probably use a blue for the highlights. I didn't this time. I used a brown as the highlight, and I don't really know why I chose that as a decision, but I'm glad I did because it helped to keep the model looking a little bit more grungy. For the skin tones, I used pretty much the same skin tone that I used in most other videos. However, this one, I didn't use the pinkle technique only because it's a dude and I wanted it to look a little bit more darker and a little bit more dirty. So I stuck with one of the older techniques. I then covered up all the cowl and the rest of the black parts that got airbrushed from me painting his skin, and I allowed everything to dry. Coming back to the grey parts of the suit, I'm going to take Null Oil and I'm going to use a very small brush and I'm going to very carefully try to paint that just into the lines that are on the sides of his suit, as well as all the little holes where he's been cut and ganashed by whatever he was fighting. This is going to help create some depth on those pieces before I add the skin tones to them later. I'm then going to take the black that he used on his cowl and I'm also going to paint that lovely bat on the center of his chest. This is how you can tell that he is Batman and not any other man, and this is basically his symbol. I'm not sure if you know that, but in order to make sure that he has some skin underneath his suit, I need to paint that skin, and to paint that I used only 2 colors because we're going to put a load of gore over the top of this, so really it doesn't have to be super hyper realistic. I used one of the darker skin tones and then a light one over the top just to create some depth, and then I spattered blood everywhere. I used my brush to also brush this and make it look like it was dripping or got wiped during a battle or scuffle. I also happened to blow the model parts all over my table because they didn't hold down. I needed a third hand. Apparently you need a third hand if you want to be able to paint. I didn't know that. And keeping with the darkness of the theme of this Batman, I'm going to keep the black underneath the yellow before I paint it on his belt. And the reason I'm going to do this is because that yellow will go a sort of greenish kind of color and it will help to keep it looking dark and grungy. So I'm going to go around all the belts with white. I'm going to thin this down first and do one layer, then I'm going to go over the edges and make them really bright on the edges so that when I add this Yandan yellow over the top, it's going to be bright and yellow on the edges around the little pouches, but it's going to be a little bit greenish yellow in the shadows, which is going to help to make it not look too cartoony and too bright and happy. I didn't want this one to ever come across looking bright and happy. I also took that time to paint the eyeballs of this Batman. I just want to let you know, if you're ever struggling with painting eyeballs on statues, just paint yourself a Batman, because he doesn't have any eyeballs. You can just paint them white and everyone will think you're freaking fantastic. At this point, I put the model together and I was not happy with how dark and dirty he looked. He was not dirty enough. So I threw some washes into my airbrush and I pretty much just went to town all over his body, making sure that he got a little bit more grunge added to him from the airbrush. Then it was time to work on his gat, which is some sort of a grappling type weapon, and basically all that had to happen was a slight dry brush of metal over the top, paint white into all the bits that need to go yellow, and then I used Imperial Fist yellow contrast paint over the top of that, which is so bright your eyes will fall out of your head. I I used Mega's purple contrast paint over his lips, and I followed that up with a Resin flesh shade wash after it dried. I also used that Resin flesh shade around the edge of the cowl to help create a little bit more depth. It's not realistic or anything, probably more cartoony than anything else, but it does help create a little bit of depth. I then took some of that blood for the blood god and very carefully painted it into the cuts on his cowl. After that, it was time for the scary part of adding a little bit of stubble onto his chin. I didn't add too much because I just wanted a slight gentle shade, and once I was done with that, I put the model together, and pretty much that's where I called it done. Hopefully you managed to take something from this video that might help you painting something in the future, anything, I don't really know. Maybe it just helped you get over your time on the toilet. I would like to take this time to say a super special thank you to my patrons for their support over on the Patreon. It's because of them that I'm able to afford the lights blind in my eyeballs and continue making videos every week. I would like to thank the newest patrons right now: Harvey Golob, Mark M, Steve, and Gary Lowry. Thank you, my dudes, for blinding my eyes with the light of the Patreon, and just in general. Thank you. Also, thank you to Zez Studios for sponsoring this video, and please check out Zez in the description below. Also, while you're there, check out Uniformation in case you needed a new printer, and that's where I would be probably telling you that if you don't like anything you saw, I don't really care, and now is the time for you to kindly f*** off. Although, if I'm being real, you probably should have done that way in the beginning, but you know, this is where we're at. And cut!